Welcome back. You're listening to the panel discussion, Data-Centric Security, Risks and Emerging Threats in Government, sponsored by Adobe on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM. I'm your host, Jason Miller. Now we turn to John Landwehr, the public sector CTO of Adobe. Welcome, John.
Thank you.
We just heard from Secretary Chertoff about the current cyber environment and how the focus on data security has evolved over the last few years. Let's dig a little deeper into that issue around data-centric security. Over the last year, we know agencies have been focused on protecting high-value data assets as part of the post-OPM breach cyber sprint. Now, I talked recently with the Chief Information Security Officer at the Commerce Department, Rod Turk. Interestingly, he told me that they've reviewed 18 of their 62 high-value data assets. He says the other reviews around those 44 other high-value data assets are actually in progress. This is just one example of the change we've actually seen over the last year. This really focus on what is high-value data. And I think that's part of the discussion we're going to start at today. So with all the cyber investments that are being made, continuous diagnostics mitigation, Einstein, we can go through the litany of different initiatives. Let's talk about why do we keep seeing these more incidents? Do people have not gotten that data? It's all about the data?
I think one of the things that the government has continued to invest in certainly was protecting the perimeter, right? It was building a strong fortress around the people, the processes, the information within agencies, yet people were still managing to get inside the perimeter, whether they were malicious attackers from the outside or insiders that are already on the inside, or even accidents that were happening inside the perimeter. So this definition of protecting the perimeter, I think, has proven to be challenging. And I think it's helpful that the agencies within the government are also now doing this review of the high-value assets, because you can't protect everything. So you really need to find what the most important assets are first and apply the most protection of those. And certainly when you have very public-facing information that doesn't need all the same protections, you can have less of an investment perhaps on those assets than the most high-value assets, whether it's person-identifiable information, protected healthcare information, intellectual property, or even homeland security information. That's all certainly considered very high value in terms of assets.
I think the point you made around protecting high-value data assets, if you don't know where to start, if you don't know where to begin, I think that's a very interesting point, and one that I think agencies are learning. One of the things that you come up is protecting the perimeter versus protecting the data. There's this theory, if you will, that it's not that will you or won't you be hacked, is that you've already been hacked, so protect what's most valuable. I mean, is that thought process around why this move to data-centric is so important?
Definitely agree, because I think people need to assume that there will be some sort of issue at some point in time and certainly be well prepared for it. And assuming that you already have somebody inside the network, again, whether they're going to be somebody making a mistake that's an employee sending something somewhere it shouldn't go, could be an insider already in the organization, or hackers that have made their way in. Starting with that assumption of, okay, you've got somebody in the network already, now what do we do about it? What do we do differently is a great place to start.
And interesting enough, that leads us down the path of all those different, I think innovations may be a little bit of a strong word to talk about, but at least some of the initiatives, whether we talk about two-factor authentication under Homeland Security Presidential Directive 12, or we talked about something like the FedRAMP program for cloud security, these things are really putting in place to address that piece that you just talked about, which is if you have someone in your network, how can you stop them so they don't steal your data? So let's start with two-factor authentication first, HSPD 12. A lot of effort, a lot of progress has been made over the last 6-9 months.
I think that actually is an area of innovation and an area where government has even been leading over the commercial sector by rolling out smart card badges for years.
I'm going to jump in and say I'm surprised to hear you say that. They're leading. You never hear the government say they're leading in much.
I believe they are, because that two-factor authentication vehicle not only improves the security of authenticating users to websites and applications by requiring a card and a PIN code, much like you use at an ATM machine, right? But you don't have to remember a 16-character upper, lower number, symbol, password that you have to change every month. So there's even a usability aspect to that. And the commercial world doesn't yet have the opportunity to do that for consumer websites, whether it's news, weather, sports, shopping, banking, whatever it happens to be. We're still stuck using passwords. The government is actually a step ahead by using the existing ID badges as a way to not only let you into the doors of the building, but also to log you on to network services and make sure it's really you versus somebody that may have learned your password or stolen it from some other website.
It's one thing around usernames and passwords. We heard Michael Daniel, the cybersecurity czar, say maybe about a year and a half ago, he wants to kill the passwords dead, which is a great headline for us in the news business, of course. Whether that's happening or not is yet to be seen. I think too many times agencies are still relying on the username or password, and they're not quite there to use that HSPD 12 card for login to network access. Is that something that, as you see happening, related back to that change in thought process around what is really we're protecting here, which is the data?
Yes, and I think knowing who is trying to access the data is an important first step, because you want to make sure that they're employees or authorized users or contractors of these applications to go in and get the data. And I think there's a stepwise approach that's building out here that we talked about. You need to know what the assets are that you need to protect, and then you also need to know who can have access to those assets. So by going through the high-value asset assessment and then more strongly authenticating users to your IT systems goes very hand in hand. And as smart card readers are now being rolled out to more devices, there are even laptops now with the readers built in to accept these cards. The cards can not only be used for logging into applications and sites, but other things like digital signatures. So instead of signing on a piece of paper, a form with a pen, and then having to mail it in or fax it into somebody, you can simply click a signature field on an electronic document, put your card in, type in your PIN code, and that is so much quicker and so much more secure, so much more efficient than doing it on paper. And it's kind of all these technologies really converging together that help enable that.
So we have the who, right? Who's logging in? We have the what. What are they looking at? Now we have to move to the where. The where, which is tough because there's this move to cloud, but there's also this move to data center consolidation and virtualization and all the key buzzwords that are out there. And one of the innovations that I will give credit for on innovation around is FedRAMP, the Federal Risk Authorization Management Program, the cloud security standards. This kind of changes the dynamic as well, because it's not just a network-centric approach, but it deals with the data as well. Talk a little bit about where FedRAMP fits into this move to network-centric security.
Yes, well, I think it's always been a lot of work for agencies to implement any IT solutions, and when they were implementing the same solution that another agency had already done, and they had to redo all the security paperwork and accreditation, it was a lot of duplicative work. So I think FedRAMP has been great for the government, such that now a cloud service provider can go through the process, get the authorization that is more easily shared across the agencies. And as a cloud service provider, it's great because it's a very formal program where you first have to implement all these very specific controls. Then you have to make sure all the controls are very specifically documented. You bring in a third-party assessment organization that makes sure what you implemented is what you documented to then carry forth to the government. And then that information can easily be shared with more and more agencies through that authority to operate to see, yes, okay, it's run the gauntlet. It's very easy for you to then get going quickly in the cloud.
And that's the point, get going more quickly, but securely at the same time. I've heard many times the folks over at FedRAMP say, we're not going to give up rigor for speed. But this brings you to that other part of it, is the idea that you have the rigor, you have the idea of the standards for the cloud services, but does it reach back into the data? Do you, as someone who says data is where we need to be to secure the data, does FedRAMP meet those needs as well? Or are we still talking about too much around network security?
Well, I think many organizations have been hesitant to move to the cloud because it's been viewed as outside their perimeter, right? It's not in the building. It's not in their data center. Therefore, they perceive they have less control. FedRAMP certainly helps provide greater assurances to cloud customers, the agencies, that they've gone through the gauntlet and all of these security controls have not only been implemented and documented, but also tested. But agencies can go a step further by looking at what data they want to put in the cloud and implement things like data-centric security such that they never really lose control of their data. And when they move their data to a cloud, they can watch where it goes. They can protect it. They can still control who has access to it, and even enable that the cloud service provider can't have administrators that can go and see all this data because it gets encrypted by the agency before it gets sent to the cloud security provider.
I think that's so key what you just said there about understanding where your data is, be able to see, okay, it's on this server or in this set of servers, and getting that comfortability. Because you're right, so many people have hugged their servers for so long. Stop hugging them is a very big culture change. And when we talk about this a lot, it's not a technology, it's a culture issue. Do you get a sense that that culture change is happening? Do people understand that, oh, I can see where my data is and I can be more comfortable with that?
Well, I think it ties back to the high value assets as well, because the first wave of cloud applications that agencies embrace is often externally facing, right? So you've got public information that you want to cost effectively and efficiently get out there, kind of like the Government of Canada's replatforming that they're doing right now on the Canada.ca website, where they had millions of web pages over thousands of different sites that made it very difficult for the public to find information. They have consolidated that into the new Canada.ca, run as a managed cloud service that gets the efficiencies and the security that FedRAMP controls bring not only to U.S. government agencies, but also commercial organizations, and now international organizations are looking to FedRAMP for that. So the first wave that we're seeing right now is those public-facing properties, but a lot of those properties also have forms. And when you fill out a form, it often has PII in it. So that's what we're starting to see is now the next generation of, okay, I'm getting Social Security numbers back. I'm getting driver's licenses back. I'm getting healthcare information. And how does that information get protected from the moment it's typed into a system, through the cloud provider, through the network, and persistently in any of the repositories that it's in, so that only the authorized agency employees that are allowed to see it can actually see it. And should somebody already be in the network, or should that information accidentally or maliciously be forwarded that was PII from a citizen, it remains persistently protected.
And I think it's a great example to show that you brought up about the Government of Canada looking at FedRAMP. We're also seeing it in the commercial world. They're starting to look at FedRAMP. This is a growing recognition in many ways that what the government has done, the U.S. government has done over the last 18 months, 2 years, is really having a much broader impact across the cloud sector generally. Is that show to you, if it makes you feel good from a provider of services, that this is how this is catching on so well?
Well, we greatly appreciate how all these pieces are coming together, because it's, again, identifying what information needs to be most protected. It's identifying the systems and the process for that information to exist in a cloud service provider, extending out to how do you determine who it is accessing the cloud, which now for the federal government has become much easier with HSPD 12 and PIV, as we talked about. And then really, I think the next wave is going to be, okay, as we have more and more information in clouds, how do we make sure that only the intended recipients can see that, independent of where the data goes, how it's being stored, how it's being transported, and is increasingly available now across mobile devices as well.
That's a great place to take a break, because I think we're going to get into some of those answers on the next segment. You're listening to the panel discussion, Data-Centric Security, Risks and Emerging Threats in Government, sponsored by Adobe on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM.